plants are very complex medicine, the way that wine can be very complex. The more that we can allow for that complexity, instead of these sort of like, this is for that, and just use this, it's good for this, you can't use this. People are so complex and ever-changing as well. Sometimes the medicine of a plant is the story and nothing you have to ingest.
In today's busy world, how can we find the inspiration, knowledge, and energy to live a healthy and empowered life? If we balance and harmonize our mind, exercise our body, live according to the laws of nature, and connect to spirit, can we find a way to heal, become our authentic self, and live our purpose with love? I am your hostess, Amy Fournier, and welcome back to Awakening Aphrodite. Welcome back to Awakening Aphrodite with Amy Fournier. This show is about helping you to be healthy and fit in mind, body, and spirit, as well as harmonize your masculine and feminine energy, tap into your intuition, your true source of power, and awaken your authentic self. Have you ever used lavender, maybe to relax, or perhaps ginseng as an adaptogen, or sweetened your cookies or coffee with stevia, or perhaps used black cohosh for menopausal symptoms, or even used sage to help smudge or clear your space, or echinacea, or an elderberry if you feel a cold coming on? Well, if you answered yes to any of those, then guess what? You have been practicing herbal medicine. And that's awesome, because that's the way nature intended it. Herbology is kind of exploding right now because people are looking for natural ways to help their bodies, minds, and spirits heal and thrive and be healthy. I am super grateful to one of my podcast listeners turned friends, Lars, for sending me the beautiful book that I'm going to be sharing with you today on the guest of the show today. The book is called Herbal Rituals. It's by today's guest, Judith Berger. And so just first of all, huge cyber hug and thank and heartfelt connection and kiss to my good friend Lars for sending me this book with your beautiful card and all your sentiments. Thank you so much, my friend. Basically, Lars thought that this book would resonate with me, and boy, were you right, Lars. So thank you so much again, sweetie. So the book, Herbal Rituals, is, honestly, it's just much more than a book. And, there's many books out there on herbology as it's become quite popular. But this book is different. It's more than just a reference book, like looking up, this herb for that condition. This book has soul, okay? And not only that, but it's absolutely beautifully written. It engages your imagination and your heart, and again, your soul. It's written with such feeling and emotion, and really takes you on a journey where it just sucks you right in, kind of like Alice in Wonderland. It's full of not only practical herbal advice, but also ancestral wisdom, folklore, stories, and the people behind the discoveries of how we figured out certain plants had medicinal qualities, as well as it talks about rites and rituals, sacred practices, some of the spiritual and religious traditions, Native American traditions and philosophies when it comes to herbs, and of course, practical, modern, everyday uses, and even recipes of herbs like facial serums and wise woman tea, and even dandelion pancakes. I mean, hello, anybody up for those? Sign me up. I definitely up for trying those. So this book is beautiful. It's soulful. It's practical. It's useful. And today's guest, Judith Berger, the author, is not only an herbalist, a poet, a writer, and a physician's assistant, but she was, interesting enough, born and raised in Brooklyn, and her earliest contact with nature was through the prism of fairy tales, the wilds of her father's backyard garden, and the dark corridors of the local plant nursery where she first cherished the scent of soil. In Ithaca, New York, where she went to university, she experienced her first encounters with the forest that would eventually lead her to study medicinal plants. Judith spent 10 years in New York City. Now, she wasn't like in Montana or in Wyoming on like a 400-acre farm, okay, folks? So she was in the heart of the Big Apple, studying and practicing as an urban herbologist. She taught at many institutions and wrote numerous articles on the history and medicinal uses of various garden herbs, even for Martha Stewart Living magazine. Herbal Rituals, her book, is a lyrical homage to the ancient practices of herbal medicine and was published in 1998 by St. Martin's Press and republished by a blurb in 2019. In 2006, Judith pursued a degree as a physician's assistant, attempting to integrate natural medicine with the medical model. To balance the left hemispheric nervous system's focus on Western medicine, she returned to writing poetry. Over the years, Berger has ventured deeper and deeper into the woods, spending much of her free time backpacking in the Catskills and the Adirondacks, studying animal tracking and mushroom identification as she continues to harvest plant and mushroom medicine for her clients, family, and community. So in this episode, wow, you're going to love it. We're going to take you on an adventure into the world of plants and plant medicine. We talk about the soul of nature and the magic medicine of herbs. How digital overwhelm shuts down our receptivity. The importance of feeling safe in order to tap in. How herbalism has changed since when Judith first wrote her book. How Judith created freedom in her life and a sense of boundlessness. The connection of the bear totem to herbology. Community of trees and how to commune with trees. The importance of dream work. The importance of asking permission, and the very important law of reciprocity. The verandahs and the concepts of Saint Hildegarde of Bingen, who was the 14th century abbess and really a pioneer in this whole world of herbology. And then I asked Judith to clear up common misperceptions and the difference between just buying an herbal tea at the supermarket and maybe getting some fresh herbs. Finally, we get into some good resources, like where you can find herbs and products that are natural and potent and powerful the way nature intended. So it's practical, it's inspiring, it's useful, and most importantly, I think this episode is going to help all of us not only appreciate and respect plants and the significant contribution they have to healing us in mind, body, and spirit, but also a respect and a reverence for all of nature and giving nature a voice, which we all need to do. We need to speak up for Mother Earth and the natural world and all these beings and creatures that can't speak for themselves, because they all are feeling things and they all are contributing to this thing we call life. So let's now join my wonderful, beautiful guest, Judith Berger. All right, welcome back to Awakening Aphrodite with Amy Fournier. Today, my guest is Judith Berger. Judith, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
I am truly honored. Like I mentioned in the introduction, one of my listeners turned good friends, soul sister, sent me your book, Herbal Rituals, which we're going to get into a lot today because she knew, and that's my friend Lars. Thank you, Lars. She just knew that I would resonate so much with your work and your life. Now, although I'm certainly not an herbologist and know very little about herbs, other than echinacea is good if you have a cold. But you and I definitely share a soul connection in our deep regard and love and reverence for all of nature, all the seen and unseen, all the spirits, the fairies, the animals, the plant life, all the sentient beings that we in our modern culture not only not really aware of, but we just don't really connect with on a regular basis. And I think this is a shame. So I was so grateful that you agreed to come on my show to share your just vast and extensive wisdom. And I'll also share that your book, although it's called Herbal Rituals, it's not just a book on herbs. Now, I have books on herbs and herbology and all that. It's so much more than that. And I just want to be sure to get this in to the listener for them to understand. Your book is full of ancestral wisdom, folklore, different cultural rituals and rites, religious traditions, spiritual practices, Native American teachings, philosophies, some mythology, and even traditional Chinese medicine. And then, of course, it's rich and comprehensive background on many key plants and herbs, but you also give recipes, practical, easy home applications like dandelion pancakes, which really caught my eye. And as well as your personal anecdotes and stories from your personal life and your family growing up, your childhood memories. And it's beautifully written. It's written in a way that's, I just thought to myself, it was enjoyable to read. I read so many books as part of my job. Your book just truly had soul. It was soulful. It was enjoyable. It had a very soothing, melodic, poetic vibe and feel. And I felt like it was like a mind, body, soul experience to read your book. It took me into another realm when I was reading it. And again, as the novice herbologist type person, I felt like I was in almost like an Alice in Wonderland. You bring the reader in, and yes. What a gift. I just want to thank you, Judith, because you really touched my soul. You reawakened, or I should say more strongly awakened, because it's pretty awakened me, my soul's remembering, and even some of my own childhood memories, which we can talk about. So I just needed to start by giving the listener and the watcher, the viewer, more of a comprehensive. This is more than just a book, folks. And it's more than just a little, like a Bible of herbs, which we can get anywhere. It's much deeper than that. And again, I'm just so grateful to have you here. Thank you, Judith.
Oh, you're very welcome. Well, when I first wrote the book, I definitely had in mind that I wanted that it was going to be more than an herbal, because it was really that working with plants, going out, picking them in the wild, learning to identify them, going season after season, depending on what part of a plant I was going to be picking, brought me in much closer touch with the cycles of the earth and with something that I hadn't expected, which was what you have mentioned, the sentience of the earth, the actual feeling that the earth was not just alive, but had consciousness. And it was my intent to have the writing actually enchant people, that the actual words would bring people into the energies I felt were happening at that time of the year. Say, for example, it was about rooting. I wanted the voice to be a kind of deep, rumbly, grounded one. So that was very intentional. And what I ultimately wanted was for people to care. And through their caring for the earth, which you could learn through spending time with herbal medicine, to protect the earth.
Yes, and I will say you definitely accomplished the caring, because, and again, it's probably because you brought the soulful component into it. This is more than just an informational, again, a resource like, this for that, like got a headache, take this, it just was a whole, you had that, of course, but it was just on a whole nother level. That you brought in the holism of who we are, which is so appropriate, because that's a big part of your message, is the bigger picture that, we're all in, and how we are communing with the earth. We are the earth, and how we are a microcosm of the macrocosm of the ecological system. And that came through loud and clear.
It was also written in a very early kind of computer time. So I didn't even own a computer at the time. I went somewhere where there was a computer to write it. And I really feel for the pressures on people these days with the sort of digital overwhelm, because it tends to make the senses shut down more when we need the opposite, actually, in order to connect with and feel a part of the larger family of creatures and plants that are on this planet that we share space with. But it's difficult because the pressures upon our nervous systems are huge. And it's definitely an area where actually imbibing herbal medicine can be helpful to sort of, soothe the frayed nerve endings and what happens to us living in this really difficult time where we all know too much and are exposed to too much, more than our hearts can handle, more than our nervous systems can handle. And the earth, because the energies are so huge, the elemental energies, be it water or the scented air that flower pollen is flowing through, all of that can also restore us and bring us back to who we are in our bodies and our spirits.
And I have said that same type of sentiment many times. I don't quote the Bible much, but it is a quote I'll say, is when Christ refers to it as the peace that surpasses all understanding. There's a peace we get, or at least I get, in nature that you just can't find it anywhere else. I mean, just sitting in a serene sunset, or just communing with a tree, or just smelling fresh pine, or it just, there's a remembering of the soul that makes you truly feel grounded, protected, and puts it in perspective, and to your point, my God, we are just lacking that so unbelievably desperately. But what I also love about your story is you grew up in New York City. So guys, this is not a gal like in Montana on like a 500-acre ranch, right? So no excuses, everybody. So can you please just let's pause all that beautiful stuff and revisit it. But if you could just back up and just give a little story. I like even you to start from your childhood, because I felt very much in resonance with that. Like when you read books and you.
Yeah, well, I like to say that I grew up in Brooklyn before it was cool.
Right.
Which is true. And I had a very sheltered upbringing, in the sense that I lived 2 blocks from my school. I walked to school every day. I was in the same class with everybody for 12 years. It was a really small community in Brooklyn. And because it was a Jewish community that celebrated the Sabbath, there was already this pulling away from the regular world. And so often on the Sabbath, we would have a lot of time to play. We'd walk around the neighborhood, the kids, and just play with one another. And we would take advantage of whatever nature there was. And actually, I was in a part of Brooklyn where everybody had a front lawn and a back lawn. There was at least one tree in front of everybody's house lining the block. But also I was small. When you're young, you're also small. So everything around you also feels bigger. So the tree in the neighbor's yard, when I think of it in my mind, and I would go and sit under it a lot to be protected and sheltered by, I believe it was a blue spruce. It felt like it was a really long walk from my house to the yard. And now as an adult, it's really not.
Right.
Unfortunately, I think that tree is gone, which still makes me sad. Anytime a tree is gone, it makes me sad. But I would go and sit under the tree, and, I would read fairy tale books. And then I would just sit there kind of relaxing in the smell of the evergreen. And then I would kind of wish for, to see a fairy, or I was just sure the presences were there. I was absolutely sure that the presences were there. And I also really liked thunderstorms. I liked to listen a lot to the birds. And I think that's part of that. When you were talking about feeling protected and safe, you have to feel safe in order for your senses to open. And I often felt the safest under a tree. I would just lean my back against the tree and I would look up into the canopy, and it just felt like I could get lost in this. There was a kind of eternal element looking up into the branches, like it would never end. So it would already put me in a very special place. And it was just really one step from there to, feeling certain that there were other beings around that I couldn't see. I mean, I certainly always believed in the unseen when I was younger. And I think a lot of people do and then lose it because our schooling doesn't allow us to keep it. And there's so much pressure, and it's a different side of the brain. So that becomes more of a challenge. Although some people, young people, they're protected in that way. But in the city, certainly in Brooklyn, it was it was all about school and grades. And then I just had this private world. I also loved Greek myths. I loved gods and goddesses that had feelings. They got angry, they got jealous, and there were, monsters and sea creatures. And I think in some of those early tales, I was very fascinated with the wise woman who lived in the woods, in the forest. And definitely images of medicinal plants, hanging plants, and people going to the healer in the middle of the forest who would, brew something and give you something to drink that would either, help the barren queen have a baby, or in the case of my favorite fairy tale, which is Baba Yaga, help Vasilisa, make fires and win her freedom by being kind to the tree that she ties a bow around the tree and gives rolls to the cat, and then they all help her escape. So all of those things made me, they were, it wasn't hard to win me over at all. I just felt, yes, this is true.
Yep. It felt familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It felt more real actually than anything else.
Wow. That's how I feel now as an adult. I'll just be honest. Like that happens a lot. I have a hard time sometimes, like coming back to the reality of our modern life.
Yeah.
But curious, Judith, how did you retain that? Because I think most kids, I think it's safe to say, have that. They have that veil is still very thin, particularly the younger they are, between the worlds. And you obviously now are not only prominent in the field, but you're still living it. How did you retain it? Was it like your parents encouraged it, or?
No, absolutely not. That is not at all how it happened. It happened when I went to, I would say I lost it. And I even kind of remember it getting covered over. But then I went to college in Ithaca. I went to Cornell, and suddenly I was in a place where there was a huge horizon, and the sky seemed endless on top of the hill at the college. And the nights were thick, the darkness, there wasn't that light that you have in the city. So there was really, and it all just woke up in me. Ithaca was very ahead of its time as far as organic food. It had one of the first food co-ops in the country, and people were very down to earth. It was the early 80s, so people were still kind of in a way in the 70s, which had a very strong back to the land movement. And so it didn't take much. I would go to the waterfalls. There were swimming holes, and that's really what woke it all up again. It was a very physical thing, going skinny dipping, and
it was a sentient experience. It was like your body connected, remembered, or?
Yes, that happened first. Okay. And then in my early 20s, I actually had a very not good experience with a doctor. And then I just made this vow, this passionate vow, that I was going to take care of my own health. And I didn't really know what that meant. But just several months later, I was reading a women's empowerment magazine. There were a lot of them in the early 80s. This one was called Women of Power. And there was an interview with an herbalist. She called herself a witch. She kept goats and she knew the plants. And then it all flooded back to the front, right from that childhood image of myself sitting under the tree. And I said, I need to learn this. And I wrote her immediately, because that's what you did then.
Yeah.
You had to write a letter. You had to get a stamp.
Right, yes.
And that I began my training, and it was with someone in the Catskills. And I met someone up there who was teaching in New York City, a woman named Robin Rose Bennett. And with this group of women, we just met every week, and we would go into Central Park. And we did everything with the plants. We sang to them, we sat with them, we learned every part of them, we made everything with them, we ate them, we made oils, we made tinctures, and I didn't take a single note for the first year, nothing in writing. I just let it be completely from my presence of just being with the plant. And with these women, it was a very wonderful circle. And that felt like a memory, like an ancient memory, that it was a tribal thing. People did this in community. People gathered plants together. People made the medicine together, even though there were dedicated people who had particular skill. There was also a level of it being very everyday, common people's medicine.
Yes.
With no packaging.
Yes.
No plastic.
Wow. That's what an experience. Like I mentioned, one of the things that I love about your work is how you look at, you actually say the earth is, a living creature. And in fact, it's like the grass is like the earth's hair. And, you notice parts of the earth that has longer grass than others, and, communing with that. And the earth, plants, nature, animals, life has distinct and deliberate rhythms, as well as an entire cycle of emotions and energies to which all creatures respond. And I thought that was just beautiful, because you talk about the natural cycle that we are a part of. Not only can we learn from, but we're part of birth, growth, fruition, decay, death, and then regeneration. Like we just have this fear of death, or God forbid getting older, but the earth is our example. It's our teacher of how it's all part of this bigger picture and all interconnected. And I love how your book gets into that bigger picture.
Yes. And even those images go back to this book of Greek myths that I had when I was very young by this couple, the D'Aulairs, D'Aulaires. And they used colored pencils. And one of the first pictures was of Gaia, the earth, and then the sky god over her. And he had stars in his eyes. He was made of stars. And she was all green and rolling hills. And her hair was the trees and the grass. And
so cool.
I remember exactly that I was 7 years old when I saw that image. And it was after I had already been exposed to this sort of, single monotheistic Jewish God that I didn't really relate to myself personally at all. I mean, there was, all the tribal stories in the Bible and the desert and all of that. But when I saw this, it just went straight through me.
Right.
And that again came back much later when I got to spend much more time outdoors.
How so? What do you mean it came back?
Well, you have to have space and time and then feel that safety so that your senses can open fully to really receive these things that are true. They might not be able to be proven by science. As a matter of fact, as the soul is shy, some of these truths are the same way. You have to create conditions for them to emerge. It's a very oblique kind of thing. The way Emily Dickinson used to say, tell the truth, but tell it slant. You know, it's almost like you have to see it out of the periphery. And so for me, that time when I was in college was a very safe time. I got to immerse myself in literature and books. The libraries were really old. There weren't the tall buildings. There were just these beautiful old buildings where the stones seemed to speak, and everything became more slowed down.
Yeah.
And it's in that slowing down and the feeling of safety when your senses feel like they can open. And it's not something you can grasp either. You can't like grasp for it. You know how things never happen when you're trying to run after them, you know? And
it's an allowing rather than a going after. Like you're not like you know, your term grasping. Grasping is like it's an action. You're reaching for something. What, and it's almost the opposite energy. It's like you just set back, and just let it happen.
Yes. And even when I was first learning the plant medicine, a lot of the way I learned was from tasting things and then connecting with how it felt in my body or where in my body I felt it. And even though there's definitely many herbalists who feel that, you know, you can't really go by your personal experience as to, you know, whether a plant does this or that. But for me, that's actually always been very primary. And when I see people in consultation, I let that intuition guide me. And I know it certainly isn't a new idea that, you know, certainly herbalists haven't always had plants from all over the world at their fingertips. They had what was around them. And they, in some cultures, you know, the healer might develop a relationship with just several plants and use only those plants, and things would have been accompanied by prayer. I mean, one of the most recent examples is of Maria Sabina, who was from South America and used psilocybin mushrooms, and she would sing and use it for healing. That was the only plant she used, as far as I know. So, but for me, I like to take my time. And I will use plants with people that I don't necessarily like know deeply, but I really prefer to use plants I have a lot of personal relationship with. I remember when I first learned about reishi mushroom, all of a sudden, wherever I was in the woods, I might almost feel it calling from across a field, and then I would look, and there it would be on a hemlock tree, like in the distance, things like that. So that can happen. But I'm also a very grounded, practical person, being from Brooklyn and being from New York. So I like to have a balance of the science, the soul, the story that plant medicine can bring to people, and the bigger picture, which is what attracted you, which is of the sentience of the earth.
Yes.
Altogether.
And you've talked many times in the book about your work as a physician's assistant, and it was the plants in your being drawn to the herbal medicine in that kingdom as a way of instinctually knowing how to naturally balance yourself. You've mentioned your nervous system, and that you developed the practices and the connection with these creatures as a way to just balance your own mind, body, spirit. And how I love how you give actual examples of a cleansing purification ritual that we can do, very simple and laid out very beautifully. And then, and I like how you talk about the opposite hand washing, and then you follow that with a beautification ritual. So do you want to speak to any of that and how the plants did balance your, heady job like we all have?
It's like returning home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think one of the saddest things that I discovered when I did physician assistant training was that the only things being taught were about disease. And so I had come from being a yoga teacher for 20 years, where the body is a tool to experience rapture and to open portals in unseen layers of the body that connect us with the largeness of the world. And then I did this training where all you were doing was learning one disease after another. And it felt like somebody was just putting one stone on top of you after another. And then you had to stay up for all hours. And it certainly wasn't about making sure that the person who was doing the doctoring was taking care of themselves, at least not during the training. But it was more this kind of like spiritual bereftness, the idea that the body was only about what could go wrong and nothing about what could go right, or even more than right in a way.
It's sick care. It's not health care. It's sick care.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also it's a very strong system with its own language that does not, that thinks of itself as the center. So if you're not speaking its language, you're not necessarily viable. Mm-hmm. So unless you can do studies on plants that prove that active ingredients in the plant work, then the plant's not effective. Mm-hmm. And of course you can't really do studies like that because plants also, have roots. They grow in certain soil, and all these soils are different. So you can't get that kind of homogeneous thing. But I did learn very quickly, and I think this was because I already had so much training I studied first the wise woman tradition of herbalism, which focused on nourishment and using herbs for nourishment as herbal infusions. So it wasn't even about fixing necessarily an illness, even though different plants might focus on particular or have an affinity for different areas of the body. Mm-hmm. But more it was, to give you vitamins and minerals and energy. And so, for example, oats, which, in common parlance, people say, well, oats might help prevent cholesterol or whatever. But in the herb world, it's more that oats tone and are considered almost a tropho-restorative to the nervous system. So they can calm frayed nerve endings. And there's a lot of plants that do this. Mm-hmm. But in herbal infusion, which is like a strong tea, something that's steeped for a number of hours, it just over time will help calm down a frayed nervous system. And I know quite a few people who just drink a cup before bed to help them sleep better. But those medicines are also gentle. And sometimes if you're too far gone, you need a little bit more bells and whistles as far as an herbal choice. But I know for me that gentle is important because of the way my nervous system is wired. I can't have anything that's particularly stimulating or sedating. Everything has to be nourishing or toning. And what I think is wonderful about that is that the medical field doesn't have anything that can support the body to come back to its natural wellness. And there's something that the herbs carry that can really do that.
So and I think what's amazing is that all the medicines and prescriptions are based on herbology. I mean, it's just kind of ironic,
Yeah, I mean, some of them are. Some of them are not, because now that we've got like they've got the genetics so down.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
There's other things out there.
Yeah. But when I think of something like aspirin, right? Like white willow bark and,
right.
you know, what's the pill for hearts?
Digoxin. Yeah. Based on foxglove. I talk about like, it's like a fairy candle, that plant. I mean, you'd never see anything that looks as magical as foxglove in the fields. And it's very potent plant medicine. People who haven't studied herbalism really can't use it, but it is the basis for a rate control medicine.
Wow.
In the medical field. Or for example, Taxol, which is used in breast cancer treatment, is from yew, the yew tree. And the yew tree has a tremendous lore around it in the British Isles, in Ireland, where, you know, the Celtic tradition has, you know, a whole alphabet of the trees. And, you know, yew trees are a part of that. I mean, I can't remember what it is right now, but I love when all those connections are there, because the truth is we're a storytelling people. Yep. Humans are made of stories, you know? And so I feel that it's a wonderful entree into plant medicine to learn the stories that different cultures have about the different plants. And I definitely included a few of those in the book.
Oh, yeah. And that's part of why it's entertaining. And I was saying in the intro how it's not just an information divulgence. It's you know, we learn and teach by stories. That's how we evolved around the campfire, you know, before we had TV. So that's part of why I think it's so effective, because it's just so much more rich when you tell it as a story.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you know, I wrote this book a long time ago, and it's you know, I get letters still from people that they keep it by their bed, they read it month to month.
Wow.
People who've handed it down to their daughters and you know, granddaughters, and people who send me copies to sign for them and say, can you write for my daughter, things like that. And I'm glad, because herbalism has also changed a lot since I wrote that book. And there's you know, a bit more rigor in the herbal world regarding making claims for this or that. Or even in, for example, doing some rituals that come from Native American culture, like being sensitive to, you know, the idea that one might be seen as appropriating something, you know, and all these things have become part of the herbal community. And the reason I'm glad for this book is that it did have something else in it. There's something that happens when you make the decision to learn the plants in an intimate way. That it just can open up an entire world that's full of heart and soul. It is not just about take this herb for this thing.
Exactly.
And even though that, and that is a level of it, and it's probably the most prominent level on the internet.
Unfortunately. Yeah, but I think the backstory is important. Like I mentioned, the cultural heritage and how all these, you know, different traditions and rituals were around, you know, the plants and the communing with nature. I mean, the beltane and, you know, all the different things that you share there was such a richness to the symbolism and the reverence and the pausing the everyday life like today. And I'd love to get your take on this. Is today happens to be the summer solstice, and everything stopped and everybody acknowledged it and came together, because it gave life meaning. You know, the life is so missing the meaning. It's got to be more than just doing the laundry and checking your Instagram posts, and next weekend you do it all again. You know, it's like people are looking for something really to hold on to, of value and meaning. So would you like to comment on that and share with us again the coincidence that today we're recording this on the summer solstice?
Well, I think that before there were tall buildings, it was easier and concrete, it was easier to feel like you were part of an earth. Yeah. You know, there was also a shadow side to that. You know, people freezing to death in winter or starving. There's a reason I think people came to want more comfort and to sort of be interested in industry and things like this. But at a certain point, we were embedded into the earth. I don't believe there was a sense of separateness. Mm-hmm. And life was such that everything, I can't really speak to it because I wasn't alive at that time, but some of that awareness that you mentioned you had, that I had as a child, noticing things like the moon or the sun, where it is in the sky, that, this bird is around and sings only at that time of the day in the forest or something like that. Those were all things that probably were common knowledge. And I also think because life was harder, people did depend more on each other. There's definitely an American myth of independence. I loved when Thich Nhat Hanh coined the term, interbeing, that we inter-are. And so there isn't, if this is the longest day of light of the year, to me, there's kind of a thrill in the idea that the magnetic pole of the earth is leaning as close as it can toward this like fiery orb that is in the Milky Way. And taking some time in my day today to just appreciate that gives me back a sense of expansiveness. And it is, in a way, the most expansive daylight of the year. And I definitely feel smaller if I would leave it unmarked. And so whether I'm alone or with other people, and it's important to mark it, but I also think if you're doing it alone, you want, however you do it, to be personal to you in some way. Everything that people do ritually has to feel alive for them. Borrowing from other people, it isn't going to be visceral or a felt sense in the body. And we can all feel that difference. It's like when you're writing something and you've gotten the words right or whatever. So I was looking in my book for the month of June to see which plants that I had chosen. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because I write a newsletter and I just sent it out today. And I included like a stalk of lavender, just a single stalk of lavender, because the Provence lavender in my garden, which is right next to a hosta, which is so enormous, it looks like a sun. It's this enormous hosta, but the Provence lavender next to it was like wanting some more sun. And so it kind of rose up on these tall spires, the lavender, and then leaned over to where the sun was. And then as the sun came overhead, it then moved and became more vertical in line with the sun. And then when it moved the other way, it went the other way.
Following the sun.
Yeah. And it was just so beautiful to see. And then I saw that, lavender was one of the herbs that I had talked about in the June chapter. So I definitely also, picked plants in the book that would go with when I was going to be picking them in that month. Yeah. So for me, I would probably use lavender tonight because it's close for me right now. It's very real. So I actually love the way, I don't know if you've ever burned dried lavender, but it smells so sweet.
No.
It's so sweet. It is wonderful burned. And so that's probably what I would do, would be to burn some lavender for the longest day of the year, which will still be happening.
Yes. And,
Yeah.
there's so much in what you just said. And I'll just say that I was surprised as a complete unknown, or what's the expression? I know nothing about herbology. Let's put it that way. I always thought it was like maybe teas or tinctures, but I was very kind of pleasantly surprised to hear that you burn them, and poultices and salves. There's many different ways to utilize the herbs. So that was really educational for me. The closest I've really had is like essential oils, which is another part of the plant essence. And most people probably know of lavender, when you get a massage.
Yeah. And for example, like the spruce that I talked about, I encounter spruces all the time in the forest, and they have a resin that drips at certain times of the year and crystallizes on the tree. And if you're careful and with appropriate asking, you can take a little bit of it, and then you can burn that. And it's also native to us. So if the spruce is a native spruce, and you can burn that, and there were certainly certain tribes that did that, before ritual, they would burn the spruce. So it can be very local.
Yes. Well, there's a lot to be said for eating with the seasons and in your environment. I've talked about this on other shows with like biodynamic farmers and all that. It's really in your best interest, not only because the microbiome and the soil and all the bacteria that you're living, where you're living is where you should be eating, because you're coherent with that, but obviously with plants as well. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I thought one of the most interesting things you shared in your book too, when you said when you were first starting to learn how to be an herbologist, the first 5 years, you had when you basically were rewilding yourself, you ate only the plants that chose to blow themselves and plant in your garden. I thought that was really cool, that you just kind of had the hands off, and you just let Mother Nature decide who wanted to grow there and be with you, and you basically sustain yourself out of that. And you said that what that ended up doing was giving you it restored your sense of boundlessness and freedom, which I thought was like, oh my God, everybody wants those two words. Like, say that again. How did you do that? So would you like to expand on that little experience example for us?
Well, I don't have a community garden anymore. Now I have, I had this long period of time where I became very involved in the forest and in studying mushrooms, and foraging mushrooms and sleeping outdoors. I fell in love with sleeping outdoors in the forest. And so my boundlessness became more boundless, I would say, during those years of sleeping outside. There was something about just having like tent walls between me and the forest, that
a thin veil.
Yeah, and it extended my sense of how far out I extended. Like, where was the meeting point between me and the woods? I felt probably more like 6 feet away from me was still me.
Wow.
Which makes me think of something that the wonderful Celtic theologian John O'Donohue said, which is that some people feel that the soul is inside the body, but he felt that the body was inside the soul. And I came to feel that spending more time outdoors. I think also with plants, it never ends. There's something to learn always from a tree, from a weed that I didn't know about before.
Yeah.
So in that sense, there's a kind of freedom. And then on another level, going all the way back to something that we spoke about very early on, I wanted to be able to take care of my own health.
Yeah.
And I feel that I've had a lot of freedom in that regard. As a matter of fact, I I was a little shocked when I was learning primary care medicine that people were like going to the drugstore and getting like these cough syrups and these other things, when plant medicine excels in that regard, whether it's bringing fevers down or helping with either a dry cough or a wet cough, or, you know, and there's so much subtle nuance to it. So there's definitely a freedom that I've felt. I mean, there's been occasions when I've been stumped for sure at what to do for something that's gone on with myself. But generally speaking, that's certainly given me a lot of freedom. And as far as the boundlessness, I think you can't help if you spend time in the natural world. You go out into that environment. In other words, you have to meet the nature on its own ground.
Yeah.
And it's still so important to me that people care so that the earth is not damaged anymore. And it's really hard. We all contribute in some way. It's impossible not to, almost impossible not to. But it's still my hope that in spending time with the plant medicine, people connect more deeply with the cycles that match the cycles of the earth, the cycles in themselves. And out of that, a kind of love and care happens.
And I think as an extension of the feeling of boundlessness and freedom, it's about retaining a sense of humility, like hands off, like we don't know better, like let Mother Nature teach us. Let's just sit back and observe, and maybe we'll learn something, and geez, maybe Great Spirit, Mother Nature, the animals, the plants, maybe they're tapped into the morphic field or something that's bigger than us, and they know more than we do. So maybe, so there comes the freedom, right? With the freedom that we don't have to drive, so to speak, like let them take the wheel and teach us so we can be free, almost like they're the parent, we're the child.
And it's also that sense of where you come out of yourself. So you're not the center of everything. As a matter of fact, bear is often considered the totem of the herbalist because a lot of healers learned how to use herbal medicine watching the bear use medicine.
Cool.
So you're absolutely right that you can definitely learn from other creatures.
Wow.
And
that's cool.
Have some more humility.
Yeah. I love that. I didn't know that about the bear. Let's talk about our common love of trees. Okay. Please, can you talk about that? Because they are our wise elders. Particularly, Judith, could you please share the amazing story of the guardian tree at the entrance of Central Park and the women?
Let's see if I can remember that. I'm not even sure I can remember it. You might have to tell me. You
lived in New York, like you said, and you would often walk through Central Park and, commune with things. And you noticed one day that there was this huge tree at the opening of the park, and it had this weird sap on it, but it wasn't like normal sap. And then somehow you noticed that there started to develop a group of women who would sit around the tree and just quietly connect with the tree. And I guess long story short was they tapped into the tree by listening to it. And the tree eventually told them that, yes, she was in fact a guardian tree for Central Park. And she was getting overwhelmed at the time because of all the crap coming at her, with whether it be the car pollution, whatever. And she was struggling. She was having a really hard time. Let's see, I have it here.
It's clear I need to reread that chapter.
Oh yeah, it's so cool. You talk about communing with the tree, blending with the tree, and putting your spine against it, or if you can't do that, you like to put the soles of your feet against it.
Oh yes, well, I'm definitely a tree hugger.
Yeah, because they're just super powerful. Oh darn, I don't know why it put. You know what? It must be not in the tree section, but basically that's the gist of the story: is that these women tapped into the tree quietly. And this is what the tree told him, that yes, in fact, I am a guardian of the entrance to Central Park, and I'm being overwhelmed that trying to do my job. So they came up with a healing salve that somehow they downloaded. They put it on the tree, and sure enough, it stopped the oozing. And you said you went back periodically and you checked on it and you said a silent thank you to the tree, and that the tree is fine ever since.
Oh, well, thank you for telling me that.
Uh-huh. But I'm sure there's like a ton of stories like that that we probably all have, you know, but there's so many aspects of that story. I love Judith, but one of which, very important, is what the women did. They instinctually knew to just circle around the tree and listen, like you said, be quiet, connect with it, sit with it, ask it, what's wrong? Like what can we do? What, and sure enough, I don't know, maybe you can share this with us. Like, how does the tree talk to you? Like, what does that mean? How did they
I'm
download
really
it?
glad that you're asking that question.
Okay.
And the reason that I'm glad that you're asking it is that, again, that practical self that I had has always been a little bit, leery of herbal medicine classes that are about like plant attunement or, listening to a plant talk, whether it's a tree or a plant, because people would come up with these, very long lists of things that they'd heard the plant say. And I'm like, is the plant always speaking in English?
Right. Yeah.
And I felt that it was a very different kind of process.
Yeah.
Again, some of that, what we talked about earlier, where there can't be the grasping. And I mean, I've had it happen just a few times. I can give you one example with a tree and one example with the plant.
Okay.
And so when I was part of the community garden in the city, there was a willow tree there. And the willow tree actually had to be cut down in part after part of it got struck by lightning during a storm. But then it grew back because willows really love water, and the roots obviously were deep enough that it had enough in it to come back. And I was in the garden one day, and there was a bench right underneath the willow tree, and then there was a young elder tree right in front of the willow tree too, very young one. And I fell asleep. I fell asleep under the willow tree. And while I was sleeping, I actually dreamed of a very gnome-like, wizened old woman with willow hair in a kind of cavern, a cave. It was very dim and dark. It was really like a dream, I guess, that I had while I was asleep under the willow tree, but it was obviously the guardian of the willow tree.
That's so cool.
And she didn't say anything to me, but it was so quote unquote real for me that it felt like a visitation, like that what I had wanted from the time I was a little girl had happened. Woo-hoo. That I'd actually seen one. Whether she was a fairy or a gnome, I don't know. She didn't tell me anything about the medicinal use of the willow, although, in common lore, willow, because it's so flexible, is considered to impart flexibility if you need it. A wand made out of willow would allow you to kind of create very tricksy spells if you wanted to use it, something like that. And then the other experience that I had of listening to plants was in a formal herb class, and I'm always having to deal with the voice in my head that says, oh, come on, you're just hearing yourself. And I really think it's important to watch out for that, because I think that, the languages can't be the same. It's like when I've studied animal tracking, you have to enter the animal's world. You have to act like the animal. You have to see out of the corner of your eyes. It's totally different. So I can't say that I was really sure as to how to apply that, when it came to trying to listen to what a plant might do. But nonetheless, I was sitting with a plant called black cohosh. It's an endangered plant that's specifically used for women.
Yeah.
It's had some popularity as being used for hot flashes and menopause.
Yeah, menopause.
But it was actually more well known amongst Native American tribes in North America for being used. It's called rheumatism root. It's used for arthritis, and particularly if it's around the neck, arthritis in the neck. And probably Native people, of course, this would have been pre-tinctures, would have boiled it, simmered it for very long periods of time, which also is going to give you a different experience of the plant. And because I'm the imbibing sort, I like that level of intimacy. I feel that that's one of the ways I learn about the plants. But in this case, I was just sitting next to it because it's an at-risk plant. I used to see it all the time in the woods when I was very young with blue cohosh, and then I just stopped seeing it, in part because the deer were overrunning the woods and the deer were eating it. It's sometimes called fairy candles because it has a very long white taper of flowers. So I was sitting next to one that these herbalists I respect a lot in the Adirondacks were, they were cultivating it. So they were making plant medicine from black cohosh that they were growing and then digging the root after the plant was many years old. So I was sitting next to those plants, and somehow I got a message that black cohosh was a plant for women whose deep feminine nature had been injured because it carried the deep femininity of the earth. This was not something I could have made up. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it wasn't something that I could say, oh, and the plant told me that it likes to do this and it likes to do that. It was just a single flash.
Out of like left field, like that didn't come from my head.
Yeah. And later on, I remember another herbalist telling me that he used it for women who had been injured in that way.
Well, that's consistent with being a menopause treatment. Maybe that's why it's effective is for that.
Yeah,
possibly. It's in the same area.
Yeah, kind of like a different
take on it.
A different sort of cycle of being feminine, going through postmenopausally and going through menopause, going through that change.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure aspects of the earth, some are older than others. And if there's a femininity in the earth, maybe there's the feminine of different ages in different parts of the planet.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So those are some examples for me. I'm not sure I can tell people how that comes about. I consider it a rare, precious thing, not something I would run after. Dreams, I always trust my dreams, so that would definitely be a way if something came to me in a dream. And I think that's actually fairly common.
Yeah, well, that's the way the subconscious communicates, right?
Yeah,
that's powerful. And obviously, based on your book, you're just your tactile experience, you know, like you report almost how, well, this is what I did and then I just felt so much better. So there you go, you know, like that's how they communicate with you, by how you're feeling, you know. There's your proof.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that the plants are very complex medicine, the way that wine can be very complex, or aged bourbon or aged vinegar, you know, like that. It's wonderfully complex. And the more that we can allow for that complexity, instead of these sort of like, this is for that and just use this, it's good for this, you can't use this, or just because people are so complex and ever changing as well. So
that's a really important point.
Yeah. And also, like, sometimes the medicine of a plant is the story and nothing you have to ingest.
What do you mean, the story?
So, for example, elder trees. There's a story from the Netherlands that a woman got kind of a dryad, I guess you would call her. So like a tree spirit named Hildegarde lives inside the elder tree. And that you have to ask permission to take any of the tree's wood, or she'll strike your babies blind. Or and actually the wood was often used to make cradles, right? So, part of what's happening, part of the medicine there is teaching people that, okay, the tree has a spirit living inside. It isn't a small thing to take a limb, to take bark, or to cut the tree down. Permission has to be asked, right? So there's medicine in that story, and that it teaches us reverence.
Yes. And I'm glad you mentioned asking permission, because there's a concept in Native American wisdom of Aini. It's the receptivity, that you don't take certainly without kind of asking, but also giving back. And I'm sure you practice that in some regard as well. Even you gave an example of one time you went to a farm and they said, hey, why don't you go ahead to one of the laying hens and grab an egg? Do you remember that one? Or maybe that's too far away. Do you remember that story?
No,
jogging your memory.
I mean, I sort of remember it, but not enough to tell it back to you.
Well, you basically were like, oh, yay, I'm going to go grab an egg. But then when you got to the hen, who was this beautiful mother hen, so contently and peacefully laying on all her eggs, and they were under the warmth and safety of her body. And you were like, what am I going to do? I'm going to stick my hand under this mama hen and grab one of her babies and take it. And you basically changed your mind, and you're like, it just didn't feel right. It just didn't feel right. And you kind of just were very just thoughtful after that. Not that it's not like, oh, I didn't eat eggs after that. It was more just, rather than just automatically being like, yeah, I'm going to grab her egg. It was just, you just had a moment of real compassion and connection with the mother hen of, this is life, like,
yeah. And I guess that's a kind of, that's kind of an aspect of mindfulness, right? So like if I'm going out to pick wild cherry bark, say, I want to make sure that there's a lot of wild cherry trees where I'm going.
There you go.
I want to kind of think about, how many years worth am I gathering based on, like, how long I know from experience it's sort of potent, and how much do I think I'm going to need for myself, my friends, my family, and people who might come to me. I mean, there's plenty of great big herb companies, but I do really feel a specialness when I can, give medicine that I've gathered myself. When I know, like, what part of the trail I was on in the Western Catskills where I found that wonderful grove of cherries, and what the chipmunks were doing while I was there, talking to one another about who is this person who has stopped and has a basket and a knife,
Yep.
So yeah.
And I think to that point, it's just, to me, that example, back to the chicken, it just showed me, to your point, your mindfulness, but it was just a common acknowledgement and respect for this other creature, rather than just taking an egg. You just had that moment of, I see you, I respect you. You might be just a chicken, but you are a living creature that's here with, doing your thing, and just that respect and appreciation, I guess, is what touched me, because I would love to see that more in our world. And it doesn't mean you don't take the egg. It just means you have that split second of acknowledgement of this other life form that is worthy of respect.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Would you like to just share your thoughts on Saint Hildegarde of Bingen? Because wow, I mean, she's a monster behemoth in the realm of herbology, especially because she's a woman, 11th century. She was German. She was a mystic. One of her best mottos was, what was it? Stay juicy and moist.
Yeah,
It
stay
was like,
moist and juicy. I love
I
that.
love it.
Yeah.
So do you want to comment on her and her
Yeah.
the greening power
Yeah, so
concept?
viriditas was
Mm-hmm.
a word that she used a lot, which
Mm-hmm.
was kind of like the power of the green.
Mm-hmm.
Viriditas means green truth,
Ah.
which is really wonderful. And I was just like thinking about her today, actually.
Oh, wow. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, she was really quite a force.
Yep.
First she got really annoyed with the constraints of the church upon her,
Yeah.
which is why she left to found her own abbey
Mm-hmm.
where she could practice as she liked. And I mean, she was quite a Renaissance woman. Besides being an herbalist, she wrote music, a lot of music that's, still sung today.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yes, yes,
God, what a
beautiful
woman.
music.
What a woman.
What a woman. Well, for women in that time period,
Yeah.
their choices were very few. To be married was not a love match. It was like to get sold to, it was like it was about,
It
it
was
was
a business
transactional.
deal. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
it
was
was
a business
transactional. And
deal.
so for a lot of women, you know, being in an abbey was, a safe haven for them. And many women were um, beekeepers and made their own wine and basically were incredibly industrious. Hildegard herself, suffered from terrible migraines. It's
Oh.
believed now that her visions came from her having terrible migraines.
Oh.
Yeah, which would make her more like a shaman, actually,
Right.
going kind of through the fires of hell to like have her
Yeah.
visions. But
Uh-huh.
regardless, when she would be in those states, she would uh, come to very interesting conclusions about the way human bodies and the body of the earth intersected and interacted. And she wrote her own books on herbal medicine that have some very interesting concepts in them in that regard. But the her biggest contribution, there's an herbalist sort of movement called the vitalist movement, and I would say that that's kind of close, even though viriditas is a much more poetic way of putting it.
Indeed.
And has a lot more resonance of magic and power together than like vitality is a kind of young sort of word.
Yes.
But viriditas is transcendent in some way, as well as being very grounded. It's a much larger term. I have a lot of respect for Hildegard. I mean, she let her views be known.
She was a pioneer. And like you said, I mean, especially for an 11th century, I mean, it's one thing to even do that now as a woman, but wow.
And she saw that the church really, they were greedy. The money didn't get to the people. They weren't practicing what they preached.
Still is like that. Sorry, but what's changed? I'm not sure. Not to mention the same people who made her a saint would have burned her at the stake for being a witch.
Yeah, just a few centuries later, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Like a lot of women like her, herbologists and healers, and it's really unfortunate, but we're very lucky that we live in the day when, let's just hope that doesn't happen, but it hasn't happened. But women like you would be too.
Yeah, I mean,
kind of scary.
Many women doctors.
Yep, sure. Anybody healing and using natural means, wow. Well, Judith, we're getting to the end here. If we can just do a speed round, just a couple real quick, because I know people have a lot more questions. And I love what we talked about, the bigger picture and all that, super important. But any misconceptions about herbology or anything we even talked about that you want to clear up today?
Misconceptions?
Yep. Or myths, or, because you teach a lot too, like common things that you have to clear up for your students.
Yeah, I think that it's good for people to start wherever they are with plant medicine. So but the closer you can get to whole plant,
Yep.
the more effective the medicine tends to be. So even though there's that scientific idea that there's an active ingredient in a plant, actually the chemistry of nature is far more complex than anything we can ever come up with. And there's often balancing constituents in plants so that you would not get side effects. There's always conditions where people want to use perhaps one part of a plant, but I think starting with like whole plant medicine is wonderful. Learning how plants can just be used to tone the body, so they don't have to be used only when you're ill, right? You can use them to experience greater energy. There's a whole class of herbs called adaptogens that give longevity. Of course, there's a responsibility that goes along with longevity. Responsibility to the beautiful earth and all of the creatures. So those are some things that I'd like to say about it, and that the closer you can get to locally grown plants, supporting your local herbalist, your community herbalist, it's a wonderful, intimate way to really learn about plant medicine. I also suggest that people keep an open mind and understand that science isn't everything. So something doesn't have to be, have a randomized controlled trial, which will never happen anyway for plant medicine, because it isn't in anybody's financial interest to run a study like that. But that plants can be incredibly effective when used properly. And I would say it's important for people to give back, like you were saying. So if you use plant medicine, maybe make a contribution to the Nature Conservancy or your favorite environmental organization, or plant a tree.
Love it. So important. Reciprocity. Now, what about your opinion, real quick, on store-bought tea as opposed to fresh herbs? Obviously, we all know fresh herbs are better, but if the listener is thinking, oh my God, well, I don't know, I don't have a green thumb. I mean, I want to do the mugwort or the dandelion or, all these different things, but I'll just buy a dandelion tea, an organic dandelion tea from the store. Any thoughts on the effectiveness and anything?
Yeah, well, there are stores that carry herbs in bulk from some of the larger herb companies. And so you want, like, say, chamomile, for instance, right? Which is wonderful for the kind of people who get anxious in the tummy rather than anxious in the neck or anxious in the head, right? Or anxious in the heart. So if you get anxious in the tummy, chamomile is wonderful. You want your chamomile to look bright, right? So if you can see it rather than it being all boxed up, if you can get it not in a box where then it also is in plastic, right? So if you can get it from a jar where people get it in bulk at different health food stores, they have that and it smells vibrant, then the medicine is going to be vibrant.
So it's just like food or produce. Like you want to look at, like you buy a fish, you really want to see it, smell it, all that, or, a cantaloupe or whatever. It's the same principle then.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Easy to remember. Any favorite resources other than you just mentioned one, going to a bulk herbalist, or any places people can go to buy fresh herbs? Or websites
so you mean like fresh dried herbs?
Yes.
So for fresh dried herbs, I use some family-based businesses that I really love. One is Healing Spirits Herb Farm. These are all sort of in the Northeast.
Okay.
So Healing Spirits Earth Farm, Zach Woods Herb Farm. There's some very large companies. The biggest is Mountain Rose Herbs.
Okay, I've heard of that.
For tinctures, I work with David Winston's company in New Jersey, Herbalist and Alchemist. Very high quality herbs.
Okay.
In Whole Foods, you can easily get anything from Herb Farm, PHARM, or from Gaia Herbs. Those are going to be effective. Yeah.
Okay.
So those are some of the larger companies where there's a lot of accessibility. And then locally in New York, I also use this woman, Holly, who owns a company called Jean's Greens. But there's lots, and lots of herbalists have their favorites. There's so many small companies now where people do seaweed harvesting and all sorts.
Yeah, I've even heard some on other podcasts and shows of people that supply their own medicinal herbs, and I can't speak to the validity of them, but it's just encouraging to know that, you know, the common, you know, person next door might be trying to, you know, grow and will share some. So it's just very, very encouraging.
And you can get fresh plants actually from some of these companies. And there's also strictly medicinal, Rico's company, which is in the Northwest, where you can actually buy seeds and live plants, all sustainably grown and sent beautifully packaged.
I was going to ask you about seeds, so that's great. That's super important.
Strictly medicinal.
Seeds.
Yeah.
Judith, are you working on another book?
You know, I am.
All right. Can we talk about it real quick, or no, you're not ready?
Well, it's still kind of under wraps.
Okay. All right. That's good though. Yay.
Yes.
All right. Yes. Wonderful. Well, please let me know when that is ready, because I'd love for you to come back and share with us your new downloaded passion and wisdom.
Yeah. And I'm also teaching, I have my newsletter, and I'm also teaching classes in nature writing, and I teach poetry writing classes. So.
Oh my God, you are the person to teach that. Okay, so I'll tell you what, why don't we now please share exactly where you want to direct people to find you, your work, how they can work with you.
So my website, which is very skeletal, is called Judith Berger herbalist.com. And Herbal Rituals, which is the book we've been talking about, was originally published by St. Martin's Press. And then I republished it 2 years ago, right after my dad died, with Blurb. So it's now a print-on-demand book at blurb.com. And if you like ebooks, you can get it on Smashwords. And if you want to get on my newsletter list, you just go to my website. And actually, there's links to buying the books there as well. And I also do consultations, and there is an email to reach out to me.
And that'll be in the show notes.
Anyone.
Yep, that'll all be in the show notes. Well, you certainly will be in the best hands with Judith Berger. I mean, my goodness. And yeah, that poetry writing class, anybody who's into poetry, and I mean, you would be the one. I mean, this book, like I said in the introduction, it's next level. It's mind, body, soul experience, and very touching and inspiring, and just not only educational, but just beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on this show, Judith. Everybody, thank you for listening and watching. If you enjoyed the show, please, you know what to do. Like it, leave a review, share it with a friend, and please do reach out to Judith for more information. Thanks again, Judith.
My pleasure. You're very welcome.
Would you like to support my mission to help empower people all over the world to be all of who they truly are? If so, please subscribe to the show, leave a review on iTunes, and share it with a friend. And if you're looking to take immediate action to align your energy and optimize your health, visit amyfournier.com. Thanks for listening to Awakening Aphrodite. Let's awaken her together in you. I'm your hostess, Amy Fournier, and I already can't wait to be with you again and for you to hear what I have planned for the next show.
Thanks for listening to Awakening Aphrodite with Amy Fournier. To learn more about Amy, check out her website, amyfournier.com. That's amyfournier.com. You can also check out Amy's live and on-demand virtual fitness and yoga classes, and sign up for her newsletter to receive a free mini ebook of 3 of her top tips for making holistic health a lifestyle. Again, that's amyfournier.com. and get your ebook sent to your email immediately. Connect with Amy on the daily on Instagram at FitAmyTV, FitAmyTV, and watch many of the podcast episodes and subtopic clips on her YouTube channel, which is also FitAmyTV. Enjoy, and we'll see you next time on Awakening Aphrodite.